Hello and welcome to the live podcast, Win More on Purpose. Today we have Esty Rappaport with us on Are You Really Limited? How to work with your ADHD instead of being stopped. The agenda, for those of you who are not familiar, it's going to be a conversation between me and Ms. Rappaport. We are all here learning together. Write down those questions. There will be a Q&A at the end, and there will be a special offer, so make sure to stay tuned. For those of you who are live, you can put into the chat to start off where it is that you're coming in from. You can introduce yourself, what is that you do, or just where it is that you're coming in from today. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Yaacov Steinberg. I am a sales coach for creatives, which basically means that I help agency owners and solopreneurs land high-value clients without feeling like a salesperson. So when I first started this about 5 years ago now, I noticed that creative agency owners and solopreneurs are amazing at their craft, but they run into two common struggles. Either they're in feast or famine sales, they get clients, but it's not consistent. So 1 month they're booked solid, the next they're scrambling for leads, or selling just feels awkward. They don't want to sound too pushy. Being nice isn't exactly helping either. So they're great at their work, but not having that clear sales process is holding them back. And they're stuck going project to project, relying on word of mouth, and really just hoping for the best. And here's the shift. The creatives that I'm working with, they're not just learning how to sell, but they're learning how to position themselves in a way that clients are coming to them. And basically what that means is they are going from, really not understanding sales and hating sales. It feels awkward, to really having a simple, repeatable process that works. They're mastering sales without feeling salesy. They're clarifying their offer and their sales process, and they're building real confidence in how they sell. So instead of just waiting around for referrals, they know how to generate the demand for their work. And I've had the pleasure of coaching some incredible creatives and entrepreneurs, including Chaya Fishman, Hudi Bloch, Hudi Greenberger, and Ellie Bosch, just to name a few. And thankfully, the agencies and seven-figure business owners that I've worked with have been able to grow by even 50% in just 60 days of working with me. $100,000 level businesses have been able to grow by even 150% in just 60 to 90 days. And new solopreneurs just starting out have even been able to grow by 200, 240% growth in even as little as 45 days. At the end of the day, I always tell people it brings my three passions together: sales, teaching, and helping people, but not necessarily in that order. Ms. Rappaport, really excited to have you here with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and let's get the show on the road.
Oh, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be with you. Always good talking to you. I am a brain engineer and I help ADHD-ish business owners optimize their brain so they're running their business with more ease, because ADHD is a superpower and you want to use it to help you run your business, not let it get in your way.
100%. I think it's always funny because when we talk about ADHD, I think so many people get stuck by the different terminologies that have been thrown around for so many years now. So I think the first place we need to start is just defining what is ADHD.
Ooh, I love that. Especially that I really don't like the ADHD term. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactive Disorder. And none of those words actually fit what it means, because attention deficit, if you know anyone with ADHD, if you've got ADHD, you know that there are times where you could get so hyper focused on things and you can focus for hours. You don't have an attention deficit. You know how to pay attention when you want to. Hyperactive, not everyone with ADHD is hyperactive. And disorder, it's most definitely not a disorder. If you're wondering whether you're like ADD and not ADHD, well, a couple years ago, the experts, whoever they are, decided to take out ADD and not make it a diagnosis anymore. Now it's only ADHD and it's on a spectrum. So if you used to be ADD, now you'd be ADHD, but like on the spectrum, the side of the spectrum, without the hyperactive part.
Yeah, but so they've now, I don't know if it's been demoted or I don't know what it is anymore, but I definitely have ADD or ADHD, whatever it is. Tell us a little bit, what are some of the common symptoms of ADHD? Because I definitely can commiserate with the idea that it is definitely not a disorder, right? I have totally been in that zone where it's just like super focused, using it like the superpower that it is. But I think that so many people, because especially back in my day, it was just thrown around as like this thing like, oh yeah, you have ADHD, you have ADHD, and you have ADHD, here's some for you, right? Everyone just got some. So let's discuss what are some of the common symptoms of ADHD so that we can really understand who we're talking about, because I don't think that everyone who really has it um, even realizes that they do.
Yes. People who have it don't realize that they have it, and people who don't have it just get labeled the title, like just get thrown the title of ADHD when they don't actually have it. So there's many different symptoms that it could be. It could be lacking of focus when you want to focus. It could be easily distracted. It could be struggling with time management, being really disorganized, get overwhelmed by a lot of information, having a hard time to remember important information, especially when you need the information like immediately right now. It could be struggling to articulate yourself. It could be having very high emotions. It often goes together with sensory issues. So many people with ADHD also have sensory issues. But most people with ADHD don't struggle with everything I just said. They struggle with multiple of what I just said. And I also want to take a moment to highlight some of the good qualities of ADHD because there's so much of the negative. You want to just share with us, like, Yaacov, as someone who you've seen ADHD in your life, what do you think are some of the qualities that people with ADHD have?
So I was definitely able to commiserate with some of the things you said. I actually didn't even know that some of the things that you mentioned had to do with ADHD, right? So, I mean, high emotion, sensory, those are things that I've definitely seen in my own life. I didn't even realize those were ADHD related. So we'll definitely have to talk about that. But I mean, just in general, the idea of ADHD itself, really, like you said, it gives us that super focus. I think that we see the world through different eyes than most other people do. And I think that that's extremely important. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are more on the ADHD side, I would even say. Myself, I'm not as entrepreneurial. That comes down to, execution and really just being willing to fail forward and just make mistakes. I'm very, very careful with how I do things. But I have seen that a lot of really successful entrepreneurs, they do have those more ADHD qualities because they're just ready to just plow forward and make mistakes. And that's a good thing because really when we fail, that's how we learn. And I actually have a quote on my wall over here from Rabbi Victor Miller that says that failure is not the end. It's a stepping stone towards success. Learn from your mistakes, dust yourself off, and keep moving forward. Right. And I think that that is so powerful when we're able to really lean in to that idea of failing forward, because then it's not a mistake. We're just learning. And that's one of the best ways of learning.
Yeah, failure is only failure when we give up and when we don't take our lessons from that situation and move on. The way to
Absolutely.
be successful is through learning and through failure, right? And like you said, like all the movers and shakers of this world have ADHD. Elon Musk, like think about how many times he failed in every single one of his businesses. Richard
Yeah.
Branson, Mark Zuckerberg, all of them ADHD with their creative way of being able to think of this world. Like you said, you see it through a different way. Your brain makes different sort of connections that other people don't make.
Right.
And that's why you get to make most of the inventions, right? And get to change this world for the better.
Exactly. Let's take it towards business for a minute here. So we've discussed a little, we've defined what is ADHD, we've discussed some of the symptoms of it, but how does ADHD impact people's businesses, right? So what are some of the things that you've seen working with business owners and, entrepreneurs that you've seen how it affects their business and some of the different things that they're dealing with on a constant basis?
Yeah. So, first of all, because people with ADHD love taking action and are often very impulsive, they go right into action without any sort of thought process before that. So, sometimes that means having shiny object syndrome and getting very excited every time someone says something new instead of actually focusing on what's most important. Sometimes it's jumping to solve a problem and then afterwards seeing that that wasn't the real problem, that was just a symptom or a problem that didn't even need to be solved. And sometimes it's going down rabbit holes when you're meant to be going down other rabbit holes. So that's one, being very impulsive and taking action without thought. Another one is procrastination. This is when there's parts of tasks that are challenging, then you're procrastinating on what's actually most important. It could affect making decisions. People with ADHD often struggle with that. And as you know, the faster you could make good decisions in your business, the faster you could move your business. As we mentioned earlier, another thing of ADHD is articulation. So if you're struggling to articulate what you do in your business and how your services how you can provide value for someone, that could be getting in your way. high emotions, like we said, if you're letting your emotions run the show instead of yourself being able to run the show another way. Consistency. People with ADHD often struggle with consistency, which is just also symptoms of other struggles that they're actually having.
Fascinating. It's amazing how much of a rabbit hole, right? Going back to that term you used earlier, that ADHD really is, because there's so much about it that I think is a lack of education, which is really part of what this conversation is about. Is the problem that the experts have created by talking to us about ADHD and the way that we've been told about it all these years. It's all these symptoms around problems instead of solutions, right? So I have no idea. As someone who has ADHD, I would have expected a course, a curriculum, a training program, something that could help give me the skills necessary to be successful with the, deficiencies that, as they call it, that I, supposedly have. Whether it's in, communication, whether it's, in social skills, whether it's in, like you said, the consistency, right? Where I can be super consistent for, a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and then I'm going to crash, right? Or it's that high emotion where all of a sudden I'll get like really emotional about different things that are going on, and you have to make sure that you don't want to respond with emotion. You want to respond in a thought out, proper process, especially in business. That's just an easy way to dump your business entirely. So tell us a little bit more about some of the issues. I know that I mentioned a little bit about it right now, but what are some of the other issues that experts are teaching us about ADHD, and how do you look at ADHD?
Yeah. So the biggest issue with the way most of the world and especially experts approach ADHD is that ADHD is a problem that you are going to have for forever. And the struggles that you have are struggles that you are going to have for forever, almost as if like somebody lost an arm. And so now they have to deal with the fact that they only have one arm. Now, the thing is, the struggles of ADHD are actually a lack of skills. Most people learn these skills by going through life. When they're 3, 4, 5, they're learning these skills. People with ADHD simply view the world differently and therefore haven't learned these skills in the way the normal world learns them. It doesn't mean that you with ADHD can't learn it. It simply means you need to learn it in a different way. So every single one of your struggles is tied back to a skill. We want to figure out what that skill is and then improve that skill. So instead of trying to build a system or a hack around the fact that you have this problem because you're going to have this problem forever and you're not going to grow another arm, you are going to grow neuron connections in your brain and can develop new skills.
Amazing. And I think one of the things that I really connected around this concept that you've spoken about, I know that the two of us have spoken about that there's actually 28 thinking skills, I think, that you had told me, and which is mind-boggling if you think about it, right? How so many people, and I was speaking this actually to my wife earlier because I happen to know someone who their baby recently was born, unfortunately, with something that you would take for granted. And when I was speaking to someone else about it, they were like, yeah, it's actually the other way around. Like, we should be amazed that everyone's, the majority of people are born regular. Like, you don't have any idea how many things need to go right for that to happen. But at the end of the day, like, so many people go through life, as you say, just learning these skills automatically, right? Through social interaction, through their, their daily interactions with whatever that is. And I think this mindset shift of looking at ADHD as just a lack of a particular skill that we might have, that we can understand by going through different systems or processes that can tell us what are the skills we need to work on more, and then creating curriculums and how we can work on those skills. It's solution based as opposed to problem focused, right? And I think that's one of the things I love about it, because there's a manner of control that we retain when we can learn skills, as opposed to when we're stuck in, oh, this is something I have now. Like you said, I need to figure out a hack of putting papers in my pocket about all the things I need to remember, and then forgetting I even need to look at those papers to begin with.
Too often. Probably almost every person that comes to my door.
Classic. So I think the next question I would want to know is how do we uncover and identify these root problems? Right. So we're talking about what ADHD really is, right? It's a lack of skills. So how do we figure out what are we lacking? How do we uncover what those things are?
Okay, before I share with you, I need to take a moment to just say that people with ADHD are lacking their own skills. So don't feel like just because you have ADHD, you're the only person lacking skills. They just have different skills. People with ADHD tend to struggle with similar skills. That's
Hmm,
why it ends up becoming this term of ADHD.
got it. No, and I think that that's very important because, like, as an easy example, right? As a sales coach, for creatives, you mentioned earlier, so many people they don't know how to give over their value in the right way, right? That's a skill, right? Plenty of people learn that skill. I had to learn that skill as someone who was in sales for many years. And that's something that, is an example of a skill that many people can learn and many people won't learn, right? And I think that what you're saying, like a lot of people with ADHD, they're going to have those similar things that are going to be, constant when it comes to people with, on the ADD, ADHD spectrum.
Yeah, really everything we do is skills. If you think about every single thing we're doing is skills, including the fact of you listening to this podcast, you're like taking in the information, you have the skill of comparing it to how it applies to your life, how like what's relevant, what isn't relevant. You are using skills. You have skills in the skill of the trade of whatever you do, right? Like if you're a builder, you have the skills of building. Everything is a skill and everything we can learn. Some things are just easier for us to learn depending actually on our thinking skills. So let's get into it. Thinking skills. How do we
Go for it.
identify which one of our thinking skills are strong and which one of them are weak? So the easy shortcut way is I have a thinking skill assessment, which you could take at lifepicksuniversity.com/brain. We're
It'll be in the
essentially,
description.
it essentially just goes through each one of the 28 thinking skills and asks you questions to help you figure out where you're standing with each one of those skills. What you would notice when you do that assessment is there's no right or wrong, like a personality test. It's actually on a scale of 1 through 5 because there's no such a thing as being bad at a skill or good at a skill. The question is, how good are you at that skill? Are you less good or are you more good? You're never maxed out. You can always become even better, right? Like going back to um, expressing like and showing your potential clients what your value is, you could be good at it at level 3 and you could be good at it at level 5, right? You always just become even better at that skill. The another way for you to figure out like where your weak thinking skills are is that for a week, write down every single time a task is a challenge for you. Okay. But don't just write down what the task was, write down what part of the task is the challenge. I'll give you an example. If you need to respond to an email and you find yourself procrastinating on responding to that email, don't just write down responding to email. Write down if it was the fact that you had to read the answer, you just like hate reading long emails. Is it the fact that you're not sure what to answer them? Is it that like you know what to answer them, but you're having a hard time articulating it? Maybe you could draft out an answer, but like figuring out the spelling and grammar parts isn't for you. What part of this task is a challenge? And that's the part that you want to write down on your list. After a week, you're going to have a long list of things that were a challenge for you. But don't get overwhelmed because it's going to usually come down to 1 or 2, possibly 3 things that are all really common. You might find that every time you have to articulate yourself in a clear way, you know in your brain what it is, but articulating for yourself in a clear way is a challenge for you. So whether it is writing an email, whether it is explaining something to your wife, it's articulating it to a potential client, to a vendor, every time in text and talk, that part is just the most annoying thing. Now, you don't have to solve the problem for writing emails. You don't have to solve the problem for talking to a vendor. You have to solve the problem of articulating yourself in a clear way. And then, whatever situation you're in, you'll have an easy time being able to do it.
I think that's fantastic. I wrote that down because, again, the idea here is getting really specific with not just what the challenge is in general, but really what is that specific part of the task at hand to really identify the ones that are consistently coming up and then attacking those individually. I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. The everything that we do, if we break down the skills and break down the skills and break down the skills, eventually come to the 28 thinking skills. That's why they're like the 20 foundational thinking skills, because everything you're doing is going to end up falling into multiple of these 28 thinking skills. And so we can either learn a very specific skill, and sometimes we need it, right? Like if we want to get really good at sales, then like we want to hone in on that skill of sales, and you're going to hire Yaacov to really help you get really, really good at that skill. However, there are times when we need to solve the foundation of it all so that way every area of our lives is going to get easier related to that. For that, we want to improve the thinking skill, and then everything else will improve.
Right. And I think that when you mentioned it earlier, that it's the idea that you could be on level 1, level 5, I automatically started thinking of it like a muscle. Right.
Yes.
When a person goes and they work out, they can be on, any given level, in terms of weights, right? In terms of how good they are and how long they've been doing it and how much weight they can move or whatever their goals are specifically around why they're doing it. But I think that's a really, the way that my brain automatically started thinking about it, a different way of thinking about it is that you can work on that skill just like you can work on your muscles, right? It's a thinking skill muscle, when it comes to overwhelm, when it comes to high emotion, when it comes to, decision making, etc. And I think that's something was powerful for me in that moment and thinking about that. So I'll share that. Let's get a little tactical for a minute, right? So what are some of the different strategies that we can use to help those of us that have ADHD, to help ourselves?
Yes. So every single challenge that you have, you're going to want two strategies. You're going to want a short-term strategy to help you right now and a long-term strategy so you no longer have this problem. A short-term strategy is a strategy that will give you relief to your problem in the moment. Okay. Right now, short-term, it is going to give you relief. It's action, it's fast, it's like Advil. It's like it works right now in the moment. Usually this is something about like making it fun, convincing yourself, helping yourself be able to figure out how to do it. So let's say if you are procrastinating on filling out paperwork for taxes or for a job or for whatever it is, then you like the deadline is tonight, you need to figure out a way to be able to go and do it. You might put on new music, you might put on a timer to like convince yourself to finish it, like to race against the timer. You might do it with a friend. You might do body doubling where a person next to you is doing the work while you're both working on your own thing. Point is to help you be able to do it right now. It's awesome because you end up getting to do what you want to do. The problem is that every single time you're going to have to do this task, you are going to need a short-term strategy. And every time you're going to have to fight with yourself and go through the whole battle of how am I going to figure out how I'm going to get myself to do this. So that's where long-term strategies come in. Long-term strategies are about solving the root problem, understanding why is it so challenging for you to fill out this form? Why do I not want to have this conversation? Again, it connects back to a thinking skill. And your solution is going to be about improving the thinking skill. So that way it is no longer a challenge, right? So if we go back to our email example and you figured out that the reason why you struggle with replying to email and why you really don't like it, you might right now have a short-term strategy of putting on some music and you have to finish it before that song finishes. Your long-term strategy is like, okay, articulating myself in a clear manner is a challenge that comes from the thinking skill of giving a thoughtful response. What am I going to do to get better at giving a thoughtful response? I could practice on it with someone in my family, practice on it with my employees. I could even do exercise with ChatGPT and get exercises on that, on practicing giving a thoughtful response and helping myself get better at articulating. Is it going to happen overnight? No, but if you spend 10, 20 minutes on it every day, within 2 weeks, you're going to start seeing improvement. So to recap, we need a short-term strategy to help us right now and a long-term strategy to solve the problem so that way it is no longer a problem.
Love that.
If you want, we could walk through something together to help us find both a short and long-term strategy for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's delve into some long-term and short-term strategies and some examples for them. I mean, I know that, from our previous conversations, I mean, there is a laundry list or a rap sheet of all of the different things that, could fall into these different skills that we want to work on, right? Whether it's time management, addiction, in the sense that we can get really, sucked into, a book and not do the things that we need to. It could be decision making skills, the overwhelm, distraction, the forgetfulness. I guess the ones that I would pick, just because why not? These are the ones that I'll probably, struggle more with. Let's talk about high emotion for a minute, right? What are some of the short term and long term strategies around high emotion?
Yeah. So first of all, what's really interesting about high emotion is that emotions and cognition are two sides of the same coin. Another way to say that is that everything emotionally related is going to have effect on your cognitive, on your thinking skills. So whenever emotion rises and there's high emotion, your thinking skill goes down. Whenever your thinking skill goes up, your emotions go down, like you're more regulated. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
This is why it's really interesting when you go to therapy and you're improving your emotions, your thinking gets better. But also why every single client, as they improve their thinking skills, improves their emotional regulation and improves their relationships, because they're both so, so highly connected. Okay. So,
Got it.
dealing with emotional regulation in general, if we want to approach it for emotional regulation is not a thinking skill, right? Like I just said, emotional regulation is connected to different thinking skills. So people who, let's say, have anxiety, it is because there are thinking skills related to the anxiety is weak to that situation. They get overwhelmed by a lot of information, things like that. But let's approach this from the emotional side so you can see we can approach it from either door. If someone is having experienced high emotion and they need to make a decision and they're about to make a decision from a high emotional place, or they're about to say something out of high emotion, what do you think could be a good short-term strategy for them in the moment?
Take a deep breath. Make sure that before you respond to anybody, you pause for X amount of time, 3 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it is. Don't allow yourself to respond for a certain amount of time. Don't make decisions quickly. Right. I know people that I have to sleep on it because I get really excited about things. And if I don't sleep on it, I'm going to make rash decisions. Right. So those are all short-term strategies.
Yeah, exactly. Beautiful. You just gave a few really good examples. Another one that I really like is actually scribbling with your non-dominant hand. So that's your hand you don't usually use to write with. Scribble or journal with the other side. The reason for that is you get direct access to your amygdala. And if you know anything about your brain, your amygdala is where high emotions are stored. So all your emotions get out right away. But you don't need to know the whole science behind it. You just want to have what? A pen and
That's
paper.
fascinating.
Yeah, it is super interesting. You could if you have it in your desk, make it fun even. Keep markers or crayons in your drawer just for this. And then as soon as you have high emotion, even if you're on a Zoom call, you could totally just take out and just scribble. And you'll find yourself relaxing, calming down really quickly.
I
Yeah.
totally got to try that. Okay, cool. Talk to me
Yeah.
about long-term strategies.
Yes. Okay. So long-term strategy, we want to understand what is going on here. Why is your brain experiencing this high emotion? I think it's going to be easier for us to walk through this if we use a very specific example. So could you give an example either of you or of someone you know where they were in a situation where high emotions came up?
Sure. Easy example when it comes to sales. So a lot of people, they're in the middle of a discovery call and all of a sudden they get an objection. Right now, a lot of times, just for everybody listening, classic sales mistake people are going to make is they are trying to deal with the objection in the wrong way. A lot of times they do that because they have high emotion, because they could feel attacked. They feel like they need to defend. Both of those, although two separate feelings, are going to create a high emotional response. And without going to the specifics of how they should do it in the correct way, let's talk about the long-term strategies of what they could do to deal with that.
Yes. Beautiful example. I love this example so much because if you think about it, you know your clients really well. Why are they experiencing the high emotion, the defensive going up when there's an objection? What is going on there? What's the real problem there?
Well, it could be several different things, but one of the main things is they feel attacked from their value, right? So a lot of times right away they feel, oh, you're saying I'm not worth this? Or maybe they didn't see, what did I do wrong, right? There's a lot of different feelings that could come up, but a lot of times it could come down to a couple of very simple ones. One, they could feel like they did something wrong and now they need to prove that they are the right fit, or they have to prove that, maybe the other person misunderstood something. Or it could even boil down to just the idea that they feel not affronted, but they almost feel like, what do you mean? Like, how do you not see the value in this? Like, I work so hard and you look at these designs, they're amazing. How do you not see the value?
Yeah. So that's
Because they're
back to
very
emotions. Like those
passionate.
are the specific emotions that they're feeling in this high emotion, right? But what it really
Exactly.
comes down to is what you said there in the end about they didn't portray their value. They don't know how to explain their value. They don't have the skill, the words to articulate what they are trying to articulate. They know that it's valuable, but they don't have the skill to be able to express why it is valuable.
Right.
So, because they are lacking the skill, the emotion comes in. The moment that they work with you and they have that skill, they no longer experience that high emotion. Over time, obviously, they have to develop the skill, but
You have a process and a system that you follow.
you have a process and a system that you follow that develops the skill. So
Right.
now it's no longer you're getting defensive and your walls goes up. Now you know what to say,
Correct.
right? Now, sometimes you're just giving them a script and they just know what to say, so they're saying the next thing. But sometimes you're actually helping them develop the skill of articulating themselves so that way when the next objection comes up, even if it's an objection that wasn't on the script, they don't get high emotion because they have that skill of being able to articulate their value.
Right.
So a long-term strategy would be understanding what the problem is. So here it's you're feeling all the emotions. Where are those emotions coming from? Those emotions are coming from like, why don't you see my value? What does it mean? Why don't you see your value? What am I doing? What's going on here? I am not portraying the value. So the skill is the lack of being able to portray the value. Develop that skill over time. It's not something that's going to be overnight. That's why it's a long-term strategy. And then this thing is going to be no longer a problem for you.
Awesome. Okay, let's try to do this like rapid fire because there's so many that I'm so curious about. Okay, sensory.
Yeah.
You mentioned that that's something that so many people with ADHD deal with, I'll call it.
Yes. So sensory is a little bit different. Sensory is not an ADHD struggle specifically, but it's an overlapping struggle. So many people with ADHD have sensory and many people have sensory of ADHD, but it's not like directly.
Got it.
Sensory is an interesting one because it comes from any of the five senses. So people could have sensory issues from one or more of the five senses. That means they get overwhelmed. Too much information is coming in through their brain from one of the five senses. So some people might experience sensory issues with too much noise. They don't like the noises. Like they're getting overwhelmed by the noise. Sometimes it's the clothing, right? And they need the clothing to be a certain way because they feel everything. Or it's the lights. Sometimes it's a touch. They don't like touch, or the opposite. They're not getting enough touch. Also, it's like too much is coming into their brain and their brain is not able to process it in the right way. That, once again, we need a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. So a short-term strategy for sensory issues, I'm going to ask this to you again. What do you think would be something good for someone who's experiencing sensory issues? If you could choose a specific sensory issue, it might be easier to answer.
Okay, easy example. I just recently got some new undershirts. I needed them to be washed, not once actually, because they were washed once and then I put them on and they were still itchy. I needed to wash them twice before I was able to wear them. Right? So a short-term strategy was I took it off and I washed it. Or I know before I even try on the clothes, I need to wash it first. Right? That's a short-term strategy because I'm dealing with the problem in real time. However, a secondary sensory issue, and we'll just lay it all on the line, right? The secondary sensory thing that
I'm
I have
feeling
sometimes,
it.
yeah, is I just don't touch me. It's funny because there are different love languages, right? And there are times when I do have a love language when it comes to touch, right? Like I'm all into, handshakes and pats in the back and all of that. But there are sometimes just no, just don't touch me right now, which is fascinating because it sounds like it's almost two opposing feelings, but we'll talk about that in therapy a different time.
No, it's real. I didn't let people touch me for like years until I worked in this. And I tell you, like, people come close to handshake, like, no, bye. Like, you're not getting close. So I'm feeling very deep on that one.
Awesome. So let's talk short-term strategy, and then we'll jump into the long-term strategy.
Yeah. So short-term strategy, for your example, you gave a really good example of, right, like of washing your undershirts before, because or like washing your clothing. If it is something like lights or noise, it could be something as like going out to take breaks to help yourself deal with it, or wearing headphones or earplugs, right? Finding something to help yourself deal with it in that specific situation. Okay. A long-term strategy is understanding what is going on here. Now, this is a little bit controversial, and there's different ways to do this. You don't have to approach this through the thinking skills. You could approach it through like making other connections in your brain. So through like sound therapy or other things that essentially create other connections in your brain and how your brain is processing the information coming in.
From an association perspective.
Less about associations and more about how your brain is processing it. So
Okay,
what's
fine.
sensory issues usually happens is when you're taking in a ton more information than most people do through that sense. Okay. So that's why lights could feel like really stronger. That's why you're feeling those undershirts much more than other people, because your brain is taking in a lot of that information. So by being able to create different connections in your brain, or through those like sound waves, your brain is able to process that information less, essentially, or really, this is where what we really want is to be able to filter out what's important and what's unimportant. That's where it comes down to the thinking skills. So often, but not always, it could be solved through thinking skills, either through clear perception, the thinking skill of clear perception, or searching and using relevant cues. Okay,
So tell me if this is a good understanding of that. So if I get a haircut, right, I could be very itchy from getting a haircut.
Yep.
Right? Although, from a perception perspective, I know that there's nothing wrong. Right? So I have trained my brain, maybe this is what you mean, that after I get a haircut, I can go about my regular day as long as I'm not going to be putting on like headphones or a hat or anything like that.
1
or
second,
a
but you've
scarf
also
that's
trained
just
your
gonna
brain
get
as
into
long
it.
as, because technically you could
I
train
know.
your brain
I
for
realized
more.
that as I said it. But within what I have done, I can continue to function normally, even though I feel like I need a shower like 20 minutes ago. Right? That, if I'm understanding correctly, is a long-term strategy, although I can work on it a little bit more to enhance it and
That's
be
where the
able to
scale
do
comes
it
in. So you're
entirely.
at
Right?
4 now, not 5. But
Exactly. But that's a long-term strategy if I understood correctly what you were saying.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, very well
Okay,
said.
at least now my brain understands it. Okay, let's talk about addiction. Right now, here's the interesting thing when it comes to addiction, and we've spoken about this. Addiction doesn't necessarily mean in the classic sense of gambling or in drinking or any of those types of things. Addiction, in the way that we're talking about it, means that we can get very sucked into doing certain activities. It could even be something like reading, and not necessarily doing the things that we're supposed to be doing because of that, right? I'm minimizing it. You're gonna go ahead, take it, and
I'm like,
explain it to us in the real way.
well, we could talk about it in examples of like reading or of being addicted to other things. But the answers I'm
It's
giving
more the
also
addictive
apply to
tendencies.
real addictions. Okay.
Right, that's for sure.
Get professional help. Like, don't just use this if you're struggling with real addictions, or everything's your real addiction could be like books just as much. But I'm saying addictions that have bigger impacts on your life, right? Some ruin your life and some just get in your way of doing what you want to do. Let's put it like that.
Well said.
So once again, we need a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. So if we're going to run with the example of finding yourself reading books, you can make it more, you can be reading professional development books, right? Like all the good books that you're meant to be reading, but you have an addiction, and reading that instead of actually doing the work that you want
Just
to do,
the thing.
it's getting in your way of actually growing your business. So we once again need a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. Your short-term strategy is going to be something to help you put down that book and actually do the work that you need to do, like all the examples that we've gave before. Your long-term strategy is once again going to go to the root problem as to why you are doing this. What is going on here? Why are you finding yourself constantly wanting to go to books? And this is the same for alcohol, or the same for smoking, and the same for every other addiction that there is. Some, like we said, some of them just have much bigger impacts than others. But by solving the root problem, then actually you can go move forward. Do you want us to get like practical examples for the short and long term strategies?
Yeah,
Or do
go for
people
it.
have an idea already of what this is?
I mean, for the short-term strategy, I would think, right, if someone's having an issue with reading, as an example, you could decide beforehand how many pages you're going to read, or you have a timer or anything like that, right? We discussed that earlier with other things that we spoke about. In terms of the long-term strategy, um, that comes down to understanding more what's going on inside. Why are you running away from the things that whatever it is, and or you're having a hard time financially, or there's a fight or whatever it is that's going on. Something's happening that's making you run towards this activity, right? And again, obviously, if we're talking about you know addiction in the sense of it getting in the way of your regular life or harm or anything like that, obviously you should be seeking professional help. But in a classic sense, a lot of these things stem from a trigger moment. Something happens, someone gets triggered, they go and they run and do whatever it is. So that was my understanding of more of that long-term strategy there.
Yeah, your brain is always going to default to what is easier. So it is easier to go and read books and read professional development books than it is to go and solve the problem of why you're having that financial, having these financial issues. It is easier to read books than to have difficult conversations. It is easier to read books than it is to do the work that you don't want to do. So, by getting clear on what that root problem is and solving the problem, not just only reading for 15 minutes a day. Yes, that will help you for today and it will help you for tomorrow, but it doesn't solve the problem as to why you have this. And this is the same for, like I said, every single other addiction. It doesn't help to just go stop smoking cold turkey. You still have the problem as to why you were smoking in the first place. And you want to be able to solve that problem because they're also just going to show up in other ways. Instead of you smoking, you're now going to be drinking. Or instead of you reading books, you are now going to be scrolling through LinkedIn. Swapping one for another doesn't actually solve your problem.
Well said. I am curious. I'm going to throw in another one because I'm curious what the difference is really between the two. Distraction as opposed to addiction. Is distraction a separate I don't want to call it an issue, but is it a separate issue, I guess, a challenge, we'll call it. That's a better word. Is it a separate challenge than addiction, or is it intertwined with it, or is it completely one?
So the way I look at it is that distraction is the bigger umbrella and under distraction is addiction. So you are using addictions as a distraction. It's just a distraction that you go to over and over and over again.
I like that. That's well said. Because when we talk about addiction, it's exactly like you said. It's that thing that you're going back to again and again, and then it gets that term of the drug of choice, right? Because it's just what you continuously are going back to. Ooh, I really like that. Just checking the time. We got another couple of minutes. Let's delve in. Should we do time management, decision making, or let's go with forgetfulness?
With forgetfulness. Ooh,
Yes.
Okay. I love this one because I struggled with it for way too long.
Yeah, I feel you.
I actually, I tried 100 things with forgetfulness, both as a kid and as an adult. All the board games, all the digital stuff, all the courses, all the programs, literally nothing worked until I improved my thinking skill of working memory by a very specific exercise that I've created to help myself that helped tons of people after. So let's start with short-term strategy. What's a short-term strategy a person can use to help themselves with forgetfulness in the moment?
So a short-term strategy that a lot of people I think will connect with, and I mentioned this earlier, is having notes that we put in our pockets. And hopefully we're going to look at the Post-it note and actually remember what it is that we wanted to do in the first place. That is a short-term strategy. Setting alarms is another short-term strategy. I think a lot of people will tie strings around their finger or on their wrists that they're supposed to remember things. Those are all different short-term strategies that people swear by.
You got it. And everyone has their favorite short-term strategy. Some short-term strategies aren't bad if they become systems that you rely on. So if you have only one system that you use and you constantly go back to it, it doesn't have to be as bad. Still improve your working memory, still improve your short-term strategy, but it could be more helpful. It's more like a medium strategy. For example, if you write things
as
down
long as you actually do it.
Yes. So here's the key point. I like to tell people have one strategy, because the moment that you have a million, it goes everywhere. So like one place where you write down your meetings. Do you write down your meetings in Google Calendar? Do you write down your meetings on a hard calendar? Do you have it tracked in your email? Does your VA keep track of it? I don't care what it is, but keep one. The moment you have one meeting on your hard calendar and another one on your Google Calendar, you're not making any of your meetings. Okay.
Yeah,
So
Google
I, for
Calendar
example,
all the way.
all like talk about your sticky note thing. I, for example, always have a paper on my desk. I usually, not usually, every night, the night before, I plan my day the next day. And on that paper, I'm looking at it throughout the day because that's the schedule that I'm following based on what I planned. I've also write down things that I remember. So if there's anything important that I need to remember, especially if I want to stay focused on the task and don't get distracted, but I want to make sure that I remember it later, I write it down on the paper. But because I know I'm going to look at that paper throughout the day, and I know I'm going to look at that paper in the end of the day when I plan my day for the next day, then it's a system that I could rely on. But like we said, also improve your working memory. So how do we improve our working memory? First of all, I have a video on YouTube. If you search my name, Esti Rappaport, or Life Peaks University, working memory, there is an exercise that's just a bit hard to explain in a really short amount of time. There's a lot of visuals in it. You'll be able to see it. Do that exercise every day for 20 minutes. You will see a change in your working memory in 2 weeks. It's boring exercise. I'm warning you now. It is very boring, but it is the thing that I swear by. It is the thing that changed my working memory. Okay. But if you want something a little bit easier, that might take a little bit more time, but works also well, is give yourself situations to practice working memory. So create a time of day where you are going to give yourself 3 things to do that you are going to do without writing it down. So I like to usually say, if you like work out of your home, every time you come home from work or you drive in through your driveway, park your car, you give yourself 3 things to do. Put your car in park, and before you walk in the house, you give yourself 3 things to do. I don't care if it is taking out the garbage, answering an email, responding to someone who left you a voicemail, cleaning, sweeping the floor, whatever. It doesn't make a difference what it is. Give yourself 3 things to do that you have to do as soon as you walk into that door without writing it down. Your brain is going to have to remember to do those 3 things, even with all the distractions, because you know the way it comes in. The moment you walk into your door, all of a sudden your child is calling you, all of a sudden you see something that you put for yourself to remember this morning, and then now you saw it and now you remembered it, but you are working on staying focused and remembering those 3 things. You go and do those 3 short tasks. The moment you find yourself remembering those 3 things and not like, oh, what did I say? Yeah, I actually remember those 3 things. Then give yourself 4 things. And when you feel good at 4, give yourself 5. The point is, you're building your memory to help you be able to remember the information that you need to do the tasks.
That's fantastic. Let's jump at decision making. This might have to be the last one. Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. Like always, we need a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. There's one thing you take away from today. Know that. I hope you got the message. What's a short-term strategy for someone who's struggling to make a decision? What do you think?
Count to 3 and just make a decision.
Count to 3, make a decision. Very good. Another one I like is the coin flip. You put each decision on one side, heads or tails. And if you are worried about that it's going to land on the other side, you know which one you want.
Oh, that's so funny, because as you're saying it, I'm like, isn't that leaving it to chance? And then you're like, yeah, but you don't actually flip the coin.
Yeah, exactly. Then you don't need the coin. I didn't see that coming. If you really don't care and it really doesn't make a difference and you're feeling like 100% with either one, then go ahead, flip the coin anyways. But if you're like...
That's funny. I didn't see that coming. That's a plot twist.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's a fun one. But it doesn't solve the real problem, right? So let's get clear on what the real problem is. So long-term strategy. Struggling to make decisions comes from the thinking skill of comparisons, being able to compare. You are comparing both what your outcomes are and you are comparing what your options are. And so if you are struggling with comparing, you are going to have a hard time making a decision.
Right.
Okay. So to get better at comparing, so you can compare your options better, so you can compare your outcomes better and see like, hey, which outcome do I actually really want? You want to do different exercises to help you compare. Start by taking random items around you and just compare them. It could be your phone and a water bottle. It could be a pen and your laptop. Whatever, 2 random things, and just compare them. Now, here's what's really important. Make sure you're comparing them on the same level, like apples to apples, oranges to oranges. You're comparing the color of both, the price of both, the texture of both, the use of both. It doesn't make a difference what you're comparing it on, but it has to be the same thing. You can't say one thing is worth $900 and the other one is blue. One is talking about price and one is talking about color. Okay. Now, once you're finding yourself getting really good at comparing concrete things around you, start comparing abstract things, 2 personality traits, 2 tasks that you have to do, 2 values that you have in your business. It's the same skill of comparing things on the same parameter, but in a more abstract way. You're moving up the scale of that 1 through 5 and getting better at comparing.
I think it's fascinating. A lot of the commonalities that I'm seeing through a couple of different examples that we touched on are really boiling down to this idea, like we said earlier, that it's a muscle, right? We start with 3, then go up to 4, then go up to 5, right? This idea of, okay, you got really good at doing, color versus color. Great. Now, do price versus price. Great. You've got that clear. Now go abstract. Now get complicated with it, right? Because that's the idea, is that we want to be building that muscle by not just sticking to the simplicity and the simple things that we can do, but working on the more complicated parts of it, because that's really where you're working the muscle, right? Anybody who's ever lifted any type of weight with knowledge of how they're supposed to do it understands that when it gets easy, you're not doing anything, right? That's not where you're going to build the muscle, right? Building muscle is about tearing it and letting it, repair itself in a way that's going to be better than it was the first time around. So I really like the way that you brought that out.
Yeah. It's like you said, it's a skill, but it also reminds us that we have a lot of these skills already. So unless a person is like extremely like disabled, like mentally, or has like extreme learning disability or something, still means they can learn the thinking skills. But people listening to this podcast have every single one of the 28 thinking skills. The question is how much, and use that to help you, because leverage what you're good at to help yourself get even better.
Amazing. Okay, what's the one thing that you would start with today? We're going to end with this question. What's the one thing you would start with today?
I'd actually start with something that we didn't speak about.
Ooh, go for it.
And that is mindset. A prerequisite to improving any of your thinking skills is having a growth mindset. Carol Dweck, a psychologist in Stanford University, wanted to know what makes a person successful. Business, academia, sports, whatever. It had nothing to do with IQ, talents, none of it. It comes down to whether you have a fixed or growth mindset about the thing. Fixed mindset thinks the way you are is the way you'll always be. I was always bad at this. I'll never be able to do this. Growth mindset is always growing, always learning, sees the failures as learning, right? Like we spoke about earlier, is like just part of the process and continuing to learn and get better at it. Now we all have both a fixed and a growth mindset. And if you want to be able to improve your thinking skills, if you want to be able to leverage your ADHD, if you want to improve your sales skills, whatever it is, you need to make sure you have a growth mindset about that thing. And the fastest way to improve your growth mindset is to watch your language. So watch how you're talking about it. I can't do this, or I can't do this yet.
That is so deep. Because I think that so many people don't necessarily focus on the types of words that they use, right? And I'll give you an easy example that I've heard again and again recently around some of the people that I'm surrounded by. a lot of times within branding or sales or anything like that, we call the clients that we want to work with our ideal client profile, right? And I've heard so many people say, "Why are you calling it ideal client profile? It should be the ideal human profile. They're people, right? Why are you calling them leads? They're individuals, right? Call them your dream clients. Make it something that's positive as opposed to minimizing what they really are, right? So that's an easy example around the language that we use and how that can affect the way that we look at the people that we're trying to talk to and how we're trying to communicate with them. I think that's something that really connects with me because I've heard it a lot in the last couple of weeks. This has been absolutely amazing. Um, Two things that I think are really important just as we're closing up over here. So the first thing is just because I really want to make sure that everybody doesn't fall flat on their on their face, break their nose or anything like that as they're trying to go through all the different things that we spoke about today because I have well more than just a page of notes here. And that is go slow. Don't try to do everything at once, please. Baby steps. We spoke about short term strategies, spoke about long term strategies. Don't even try to do them both at the same time. Just take one thing that really spoke to you that you can attach to and say, hey, this is something I really want to work on. And then do a part of it. Get really good at that. Do it a little better. And then you can add something else into the mix, right? So that's number one. The second thing is, I think that we spoke about this a bunch of times today, but you have the control of taking your life to the next level, right? It's like Ms. Rappaport said, it's about the mindset around with which you are talking about the subject at hand, around yourself and how you look at yourself and the ability to grow with that growth mindset in mind. I think those are two very big takeaways that people need to keep in mind as they go through that process. And I mentioned at the beginning, we had a teaser that there's going to be an amazing offer at the end. It was teased a little bit in the middle when Ms. Rappaport started telling us about the assessment, but tell us a little bit about the offer that you have for everyone listening today.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. This is so fun. If you want to go deeper and really understand where your thinking skills are standing right now, because this growth mindset where you are right now might not be the same place in 3 months, you'll want to take the thinking skill assessment at lifepixuniversity.com/brain. It will walk you through those 28 thinking skills and help you understand where you are. And then in 3 months' time, you can take it again and see if there's been any changes.
Absolutely amazing. And as well, Ms. Rappaport's LinkedIn will also be in the description, so you could feel free to reach out with questions or anything that you want to understand more about today's podcast around the assessment, anything like that. And as well, an offer that I'd like to give these live podcasts, we try to talk about things that are timely, interesting, things that you can add to your skill set toolbox, as I like to call it. And if there's anything specific you feel that I can help you with, whether it's around sales, whether it's just something we spoke about today, it could even be around ADHD. I kind of laid it bare today on a lot of different things that I go through. So happy to commiserate and talk to you and try to help. But you can feel free to grab a 30-minute strategy call on my calendar. It'll be in the description as well, or reach out to me through my contact information. And again, I just want to say an absolute huge thank you to you, Ms. Rappaport, for joining us today. I have already been impacted in a tremendous way by our conversation, and I'm really looking forward to see what the future brings by delving a little deeper into this rabbit hole of these 28 thinking skills. So I'm really excited.
Let's go. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Absolutely. And to everyone else who's with us here today and who's listening, thank you very much for joining us. And until next time, have an amazing rest of your day. Bye-bye.